Hi, first grade. Today I'm going to read more of The Magic Tree House, Midnight on the Moon. To remind you where we left off, what happened was Jack wanted to read in his book to find out more about the moon, and Annie said, "Forget about the book," so she threw the book in the air, and it was floating away. So Jack went to go get his book, but he fell over. So Annie had to work really hard to pull him back up, and we ended there. So I'm going to continue reading. Hey Siri, set timer for 10 minutes.
Your timer is set for 10 minutes.
Thanks, said Jack after Annie pulled him up. No problem, she said. It was easy. You were really light. Thank goodness, said Jack. It's impossible to get up alone. He picked up the moon book. It was covered with dust. He brushed it off. Oh, wow! Look, said Annie. She stood at the edge of a crater. What is it? Said Jack. A moon buggy, said Annie. A buggy was parked in the crater. It had 4 huge wheels. Do you know what a moon buggy is? It's like a robotic car that can drive around the moon. Scientists use it to study more about the moon. The buggy was parked in the crater. It had 4 huge wheels. Let's go for a ride, said Annie. We can't, said Jack. We just have 2 hours of air in our tanks, remember? I bet we'll find the M thing faster if we take the moon buggy, said Annie, as she bounded into the crater. But we can't drive, said Jack. I bet I can drive this, said Annie. It looks easy. Come on. She jumped into the driver's seat. But you don't have a license, said Jack. Who cares, said Annie. There aren't any roads on the moon, or stoplights, or policemen either. She was right, thought Jack. Well, go slow, he said, and he climbed in right beside her. Annie pushed the button labeled on. The moon buggy lurched backwards. Yikes, said Annie. Step on the brake, said Jack. Annie pressed a pedal on the floor. The buggy stopped with a jerk. Phew, she said. It must be in reverse, said Jack. Let me study this. Before he could study anything, Annie pushed another button. The buggy tilted back. Its front wheels started to rise in the air. Let me out of here, said Jack. Annie pushed more buttons. The buggy's front wheels landed back on the ground, and the buggy leaped forward. Slower, said Jack. I can't, said Annie. I don't know how. Annie steered the buggy over the tracks on the ground. The wide wheels kept it from sinking into the deep dust. Careful, said Jack. The buggy zoomed out of the crater. Gray clouds of dust rose behind them as they took off across the moon. Chapter 5. Hang on! Annie drove the moon buggy over bumps and hollows. It bucked like a bronco. I'm going through there. She pointed to an opening between 2 mountains. The buggy bumped toward the opening and shot through. On the other side, the ground was even rockier. Can you imagine how bumpy of a ride that would be? Look for the 4th M thing, said Annie, bouncing up and down. Jack groaned. Looking for anything on this wild ride was impossible. Slow down, he said. How? Try pressing on the brake pedal on the floor, slowly. Annie pressed on the brake. The buggy slowed down. Jack sighed with relief. Phew! The ride was still bumpy, but now at least he could take a good look at the moon. He had never been to such a colorless, barren place. There was no green, no blue, no red, no water, no trees, no clouds, only giant gray rocks and craters, and an American flag. Here's a picture. Oh man, said Jack. That's from the first astronauts who landed on the moon. And look, a telescope, said Annie. She drove near the flag and telescope. Then they put her foot on the brake until the buggy stopped. She pressed a button that said off. Then she and Jack hopped out. They took slow, giant steps to the site of the first moon landing. Beside the flag was a sign. Annie read it aloud. Here, men from the planet Earth first set foot on the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind. That's a good message, said Jack. He handed the moon book to Annie. Then he took out his notebook and pencil to copy the sign. Let's leave our own message, said Annie. What should we say? Asked Jack. The same thing, said Annie. But say we are the first kids. Jack turned to a new page in his notebook. In big letters, he wrote their message. Now we have to sign it, said Annie. Jack signed his name. Then he passed the notebook and pencil to Annie. She signed her name and passed the notebook back. Jack tore out the piece of paper. He put it by the flag. Today, the first kids from the planet Earth came to moon. We came in peace for all children. Jack and Annie. Here's a picture of their note. No wind would ever blow the message away. No rain would ever fall on it. It would be there forever, unless someone moved it. Thinking of forever made Jack feel dizzy. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. Then he remembered the time. Had 2 hours passed yet? I wish I had a watch, he said, standing up. We might be running out of time. He had, oh, wow, a moon man, said Annie. What? Jack turned to look at her. She was staring through the telescope. Jack walked over to the telescope. Annie stepped aside so he could look too. Jack gasped. In the distance, something was flying above the ground. It looked like a giant man in a spacesuit. Here's a picture of it. Chapter 6, High Jump. Who is that? Said Jack. I don't know, said Annie, but we'll soon find out. She started waving. No, said Jack. He grabbed her arm. Let's go back to the base before he gets here. Why? Said Annie. We don't know who he is, said Jack. We don't know if he's friendly or mean or what. But we can't go back, said Annie. We haven't found the 4th M thing yet. We won't be able to go home. It doesn't matter. We can lock the door at the moon base until he goes away, said Jack. Then we can get new air tanks. Jack hurried to the moon buggy. Come on! He jumped into the driver's seat. Annie gave a little wave to the dot in the sky. Then she climbed into the moon buggy. The buggy took off. Careful, said Annie. They bumped over rocks as Jack turned the buggy around. Then they zoomed toward the pass. Jack steered around craters and rocks. More than once, the buggy nearly tipped over. Whoa, slow down, said Annie. They were almost at the mountain pass. Suddenly, a cloud of dust flew up in front of them. The ground trembled. Trembled means to shake. The ground trembled. "Watch it," said Annie. Jack couldn't see a thing. He stepped on the brake. The buggy jerked to a stop. The dust settled. A giant rock had fallen into the narrow pass. It was stuck between the two walls of rock. What does that mean if the rock fell between them? Jack and Annie were trapped. Jack quickly found a picture of a giant rock in the moon book. He read aloud, "Rocks of all sizes crash into the moon from outer space. These rocks are called meteorites." "We're lucky that meteorite didn't land on us," said Jack. "Yeah, and I guess it's too big to be the M thing." That's my timer. I'm going to finish this page. She had climbed out of the moon buggy and was standing by the meteorite. It was more than twice as tall as she was. Jack looked at the black sky. The flying thing was nowhere in sight. Yet. "We'll have to jump over it," Annie said. "Jump? I don't think so," said Jack. "It's too high." "I'm going to try anyway," said Annie. "Wait, let's think first," said Jack. But Annie was already backing up. "1, 2, 3, go!" she shouted, and took giant leaping steps toward the meteorite. When Annie got close to the rock, she pushed off the ground. Then she flew through the space and disappeared behind the meteorite. "Annie!" Jack called. There was no answer. And I'm going to stop there. So we're going to have to find out once again if Jack can find Annie. And if Annie was able to jump over the meteorite. Thanks for listening along.